and welcome back to the Nasty Metal Productions channel here at YouTube, and welcome to another Album of the Week. This is episode number 189. Heavy fucking Metal Maniac. I could just end this video on that line right now, and not only would this make, by default, the shortest Album of the Week episode, but the end result would make this episode one of the highest viewed behind my episode on Status Quo's Pile Driver. But I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do like I always, like I do, and that's spotlight the importance of this heavyweight and why this was such an important album to the growing evolution of metal, not only in 1983, but the foundation of it in general. So, let's just get right on to it, shall we? So, Heavy Metal Maniac was the eponymous debut for this Canadian power trio, originally released through Mike Varney's Shrapnel Records on January 15th of 1983, not June 15th, like those slapnuts over at Encyclopedia Metallum made me think for all these years. You morons. Really, you should have been fact-checking everything before you submitted anything onto your website before it hit the web in 2002. Fucking idiots. But now, I know it was January 15. I mean, come on. It was the second full-length album to be released on the label behind the debut Wild Dogs record, which, again, that came out pretty early. So anyways, let's begin to dive into a brief rundown of the history for Canada's Metal Maniacs, shall we? I know I used that word again, but again, you get the point. You get it, folks. So, the story of Exciter begins in the year of 1978, formed by John Rickey. I think it might be John Rickey, I think is how you pronounce his last name. Anyways, I digress. Let's continue on. After the initial breakup of the band he was originally in, Hellraiser, however, in 1978, John Rickey decided to come up with a new version of Hellraiser and recruited both Alan Johnson and Dan Beehler, who both had freshly come out of a band named Jet Black, not the same Jet Black that was featured on the L'Amour Rocks comp. So this planted the seeds for what would soon become Exciter, and in May of 1979, they permanently changed their name to Exciter. Probably naming themselves after the Judas Priest song of the same name off of 1978's classic record, Stained Class. In June of 1981, after spending several years, and playing small clubs, the power trio would record what would be their very first demo, which would spawn the eponymous track, World War III, which would land them their very first record appearance. After sending their tape to Mike Varney in San Francisco, the track would soon end up on Shrapnel's US Metal Volume 2 compilation record, which I proudly own an original of, because there's never been a reissue. Yeah, I do own it. Just, I don't have it with me right now, while in the making of this recording. The comp would also feature other heavyweights like the Rods, Wild Dogs, Vixen, which included a very young Marty Friedman, Megadeth fame, and Michelangelo Badio. I think that's how you pronounce his name. Again, it's self-explanatory for him, though. You probably know who that guy is. So, by August of 1982, the band would enter the Dungeon Studios in Aylmer, Quebec, Canada, which is where Heavy Metal Maniac was born. However, according to John Rickey and Dan Beehler in an interview that took place on November 7th of 1982, which this is obviously from a recording that is featured as a actually it's two parts of this recording. Again, they're featured as bonus tracks on the 2005 Megaforce reissue, which again I proudly own as well. Yeah, again, for any of those that want to make more comments that I don't listen or even own any of the albums that I basically spotlight on these Album of the Week episodes, well, I'm telling you what copies that I own. So don't try and heckle me, you fucking idiots. Okay, let's move on. The thing is, this was just 2 months before the album was released. They weren't, at this point, they weren't quite certain if a label was going to release Heavy Metal Maniac. Again, this was at the time of the interview in November 7th of 1982. Because again, while at this point, they were still in the middle of getting the artwork cover ready. Since again, at the time, that apparently no other Canadian label, probably like Attic for example, was not interested in signing Exciter because they, quote-unquote, thought they were too heavy. I guess Anvil doesn't ring a bell. So, also, they weren't really quite certain if, even though after Mike Varney featuring them in his US Metal Volume 2 comp, I guess at the time it wasn't quite certain if he was going to, release the record, himself, or any other metal label, let's say like Metal Blade, or even let's say like Combat Records, which was pretty much beginning to be in its early stages at this point. So again, it's not quite certain, or even like Roadrunner or Megaforce at this point too, or so on and so on, were even going to be interested in releasing their debut full-length record. So if none of these labels was really going to release Heavy Metal Maniac, they were dead set on releasing the record themselves, which did not become the case, given that Mike Varney ended up releasing the album by January of 1983, and thus the first true speed metal record was unleashed upon the masses, technically beating Metallica's Kill 'Em All by several months, as one of, if not, the heaviest record to come out that year, till Slayer came and capped the year off with their debut. But that story is being saved for the end of 2023, folks. So here we go. Heavy Metal Maniac. This album contains about 8 full songs and 1 introductory track, clocking in at 37 minutes and 59 seconds. These tracks are, again, going from the very short, I guess, 1 minute and 30 second intro, whatever, 41 intro, whatever, it's like almost a 1 minute and a half, whatever, this is a short little track called Holocaust, which pretty much serves as the, the interlude into Stand Up and Fight. Then, of course, the title track, Iron Dogs, Mistress of Evil, Under Attack, Rising of the Dead, Black Witch, and then capping the album off with Cry of the Banshee. So there it is, folks. There's your 9 tracks for this bona fide classic. So where do I begin? We're talking about one of the more important albums to not only speed metal, but thrash as well. This album helped spawn one of the most exhilarating styles of metal that some claim to have been birthed by Metallica with their debut. However, it seems like over time, people have finally reevaluated their outlook and have gone backwards, pretty much landing on this behemoth. I don't know why this album gets overlooked by many mainstream journalists. Maybe because this debut was released on Shrapnel and not Megaforce, nor Metal Blade for that matter, or maybe it's because the band is not from San Francisco or fucking LA. I don't understand that. Either way, but that shouldn't have taken away this album's importance to the evolution of speed and thrash. This album laid down every single groundwork for every other speed metal and thrash metal band to have had come out, afterwards, to have come afterwards and so on. Now, I can go on further with explaining the importance. However, I'm instead going to go into my story of how I was introduced to the Stone Cold Classic. My introduction to Exciter began in the mid-2000s, roughly 2005. Still a kid then, my grandmother had actually bought the DVD copy of one of the more infamous heavy metal horror movies to have had come out in the 80s, that one being Trick or Treat. While the film was very cheesy, again, it's mostly noted for featuring Gene Simmons and Ozzy Osbourne, even though Ozzy only had a very brief cameo in the film. Still, as a young kid who was introduced to stuff like Priest, Maiden, Metallica, Slayer, Anthrax, Motorhead, Megadeth, and so on. So the character's bedroom was a huge highlight for me. But it soon came to his record collection that really kind of piqued my interest really early on. There is a scene where his mother is going through his records that he left on his table, I think. And as she's going through them, I'm being shown a grail's worth of albums from bands who I didn't even know about. But all this did was introduce me to new bands that I would later search for. So this scene, and the entire film, served as a mandatory list for this little metalhead kid who only knew the obvious ones. This began a journey down the path of the rare and obscure. Now, of the records that were shown, what caught my eye was this record by Exciter. Now, it was a copy of Unveiling the Wicked, which at the time was their newest album. Again, but just like the fact that he also had a poster of Raven's The Pack is Back. Again, when it comes, Raven and Exciter, these two albums, well, again, they're not their most popular. However, you can make, let's say, the argument that Unveiling the Wicked was a much better record than The Pack is Back ever was by Raven. Still, it was never really their best because of, again, it toned down a little bit of their style a little bit. It wasn't nearly as raw. It wasn't nearly as hugely heavy, even though it does have some pretty cool tracks on the album anyways. It's just that the production stuff, it's a far cry from what you were getting early on, with especially this debut here from Exciter. Still, the cover and the logo jumped at me, and that stayed with me for years. It wasn't until 2009 that I would go backwards and eventually land on the classic 1983 debut album. And from there on, I was instantly hooked. From the opening sounds of the Holocaust, with its eerie wind sounds, to then the first notes of the band, which is not quite the fiery speed, but more of a very doomy, sort of brooding pace and feel to it. And then after a minute of this, I'm then finally treated with Stand Up and Fight, the first real taste of the blistering assault, leveled with rapid-fire riffs from John Ritchie and machine gun drums and air raid siren-like vocals from Dan Beehler. I was in for one hellacious ride. This album is the very definition of speed metal, but besides the armored piercing songs, this album also boasts some more moodier, semi-slower, paced tracks, like the Alan Johnson penned Mistress of Evil and Black Witch. Again, they both have a Black Sabbath-like tone to them, but they both consist of just majestic riffs, and especially like Black Witch, which it's almost like a semi-ballad, but it's not. It's more similar to something like Beyond the Realms of Death from like Judas Priest again, it just has that same kind of feel, the way it begins or something, kind of even reminds me a little bit of something I expect from like Fate's Warning on their debut, or even their second album, it just has that kind of feel. It's a little progressive, but yet it just has a nice touch to it, and as it really kind of, builds on and keeps going, again, almost like a crescendo to an extent, and when it finally ends, you're just like completely bombarded with that classic Exciter speed metal that they're just known for, and it just unleashes hell onto your ears. And it just one of those things that just really grabs me about that song. So just a fantastic track, and really a really great highlight off this album. But the thing is, with these songs, Dan Beehler is able to show off his range here. Again, he just gives off a more melodic performance. Before both these songs, again, they, like I've stated, they just turn into devastating wall bangers. Just fantastic songs. Then we have Iron Dogs, which it does have that sort of same Black Sabbath tone to it, but at the same time, I also get a lot of Anvil vibes to this song. But it's just more dirgy, more rugged. Again, just another personal favorite off this album. I just love it. It just begins like that. Again, it just has a pounding feel to it. Something I remind of like Metal on Metal. But the thing is that this one's a little more progressive than like Metal on Metal. It's not just like one note or something, just not one single pace. It begins like that, but as it keeps on going, it then gets fast, and it's just fucking amazing. Just great shit from this song. Again, this album is loaded from front to back. Some of my personal favorites here are like Under Attack, with its early thrashy tone to it, just neck-breaking speed, and then there is Cry of the Banshee, which serves as the signature song for Dan Beehler. Again, it's just the title alone that summons up Dan Beehler's voice, who has always been described as sounding like a banshee. It's just another landmark in the evolution of metal singing, from the days of like Ian Gillan to David Byron of like Uriah Heep and Klaus Meine of Scorpions and Rob Halford, John Gallagher, and of course during this early period, still in the early 80s, King Diamond with Merciful Fate. And here we've got Dan Beehler. So just talk about an evolution indeed. And finally, the title track, which served as one of Exciter's really their main signature track. I mean, Dan Beehler, he really fits the persona of Cry of the Banshee. So in a way, that kind of is almost his signature track, in my personal opinion, probably for more others as well. But really, the song Heavy Metal Maniac was, I think, one of the first defining songs for Exciter before, songs like Pounding Metal and Violence and Force. So it's just, yeah, it's just rounding out an album that kicked off a new generation that would then get led by Metallica, Anthrax, Slayer, Exodus, Dark Angel, Voivod, Hellstar, Megadeth, Agent Steel, Hallows' Eve, etc., and etc. Venom may be credited to coming up with the idea of pushing the boundaries of what metal could be in 1981 with their debut, Welcome to Hell, but Exciter took it and made it into something completely different. And that would be virtually influential to thousands of people. This album truly contained all the ingredients that, to me, fit the credentials of what speed metal is, making this album the first true speed metal album. So folks, this album has turned 40 years old, and this week, what a fine time to celebrate this monument in metal. So for those who, for years, who cut their teeth on this classic, whether those comments be positive or negative, you can leave your thoughts in the comment section below. But if you have never even listened to this album, go listen to it. I say no more. Thank you. Hope all of you enjoyed. This is Heavy Thrasher saying I am out, and I'll see you all later. Take care, everyone.